All right. Now, I'm asking you to upload a draft of your project. And so let me be very specific about what I mean by draft. Specifically, I'd like you to upload around 4 paragraphs of the project. And so it's not necessarily a complete draft, but it should give me a very clear understanding of the lines of reasoning that run throughout the paper. So, for example, if we come back to this organizational map that I introduced earlier, we can see that the paper consists of the analysis sections, the value sections, and the connection sections. I'm asking you to give me at least 2 analytical paragraphs that discuss those patterns, and then I'm asking you to give me at least 1 paragraph about values and 1 paragraph about connections. So let me address the values and connections section of the paper. To do that, let me share with you a draft paper on GNC, the example that we've been discussing this week. In this draft paper, you can see that I've provided the thesis, and then I have 2 paragraphs that provide analytical arguments about patterns. And so this is the sort of work that I addressed in the last video. After that, I have a paragraph that talks about the values, cultural narratives, or ideologies that underpin those patterns. And then I have a paragraph that begins to make connections. And so I want to start with this one here, the part 2 section. In this paper, you will remember that we were addressing the illusion of medical credibility. And so that now, for me, becomes this kind of cultural narrative discussion because it suggests that in the culture, there is this real trust in the medical establishment. And so if we can make our language seem as if it's medical, then people may buy into what we're trying to say or what we're trying to sell. And so in this little section, I have this claim. When combined, these categories demonstrate that GNC manipulates the customer's understanding of science and trust in the medical industry in order to make a profit. And so again, I'm making a claim. And so this section is hard to say. It is hard for me to say exactly what you should pinpoint because I'm unsure what patterns you're seeing. And of course, it all depends on the discourse that you're analyzing. However, I can give you things to consider. In this section, you may really want to think about our earlier conversation about cultural narratives. And you'll remember that in the first unit, we talked about how cultural narratives are everywhere and they deal with all sorts of subjects. So you can think about issues of gender, class, race, sexual orientation, age, food, family, religion, politics, the environment, business, capitalism, anti-establishment thinking. Right? These are the sorts of topics that you may want to consider when you start looking at how your discourse operates. And so I hope that these here serve as kind of a catalyst for potential values and beliefs that you may start to see underpin your discourse. Of course, in this case, we can see how this cultural narrative here connects to both how we feel about medicine and to business, right? How we can use feelings about medicine in order to generate business. So that's what's happening in section 2. Now in section 3, we're just building those connections. And so if we look here, we can see that I'm taking my discussion about GNC and I'm now connecting it to other discourses that exist. And I'm just going to read the first sentence. Ultimately, GNC's discourse parallels a variety of similar pseudoscientific discourses, from fad diet plans to anti-vaccine organizations and websites. And so note what's happening here is that we're building a connection between the values and ideologies that underpin my discourse and those same values and ideologies that underpin how communication happens in other discourses. And that's what I'm looking for in the third section. I'm looking for you to make those connections. And now in this section, you're really kind of having to think about your value or your cultural narrative in light of other places where you see it happening. We're really thinking about how these things get disseminated, right? How these values, how these beliefs are disseminated throughout our culture. And so we're trying to make those connections. Finally, Whoops. Finally, I want to make a special point here. If you look at my draft, you'll see that there's some outside research in there. And am I demanding that there's outside research? Not necessarily, although I am demanding that there's evidence or support for the claims that you're making. That evidence and support can come in all shapes, right? So it could be kind of researched evidence from articles, or it could be personal anecdotes and even observations. So I hope that this helps, and I look forward to those drafts.